It was after midnight, the sky a deep consuming black as I drove along the winding back roads on my way home from a friend's place. I wasn't too familiar with the area. My phone's GPS kept going out, and I had taken a wrong turn an hour ago. But I figured if I just kept driving, I'd eventually find a main road. The fuel gauge had dipped into the last quarter tank, but I pushed the worry down. I could figure this out. The road was eerily empty, only the occasional tree stretching out like some twisted skeleton, casting faint shadows in my headlights. I was just starting to wonder if I'd accidentally entered some hidden ghost town when I spotted it. A figure, standing on the edge of the road, barely illuminated by my high beams. I swayed too warm for a chilly night like this, and he was just standing there, completely still, staring into the trees. Load down, and as I got closer, I saw that it was a man. He was tall, wearing a black hoodie that looked I could barely make out his face, but something about him felt off, wrong in a way I couldn't quite put into words. For a moment, I considered stopping to see if he needed help, but something, call it instinct, kept my foot on the pedal. I pressed down, moving past him, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. As I passed him, I caught a glimpse in my rearview mirror and nearly jumped. He was watching me, his head slowly turning to follow my car as I drove past. And then, after a few seconds, he stepped onto the road. My heart thudded in my chest. Why was he doing that? It was like he was daring me to stop or maybe to come back. I shook off the thought, focusing ahead. It was just a weird encounter. I needed to keep moving. But a mile or so later, I spotted something in the road. As I got closer, I realized it was the same man, standing dead center in the lane, his back to me. There was no way he could have gotten here before me. The road was too long, too empty, and I hadn't seen any cars pass by. My hands gripped the wheel, my mind racing. I honked the horn and the blare echoed into the night. He didn't move. "Come on, man," I muttered, my voice shaky. "Move!" I tapped the gas, edging closer, hoping he'd step aside, but he didn't flinch. It was as if he didn't even hear me. I pulled to the side, aiming to go around him, but as soon as I moved, he turned to face me. His face hidden under the shadow of his hood, his posture tense. I hit the gas, swerving around him, and sped off, my heart hammering. As I glanced back in the mirror, I could just barely make out his shape shrinking in the distance, still standing in the middle of the road. By now, my pulse was a steady drumbeat of fear, my mind struggling to make sense of what I'd just seen. I just had to make it home. But no more than 2 miles later, as I rounded a bend, I saw something up ahead in the road again, and it was him. This time, he wasn't alone. There were 2 other figures with him, both dressed in dark clothes, all 3 standing side by side across the entire width of the road, blocking me in. My stomach dropped. This was no coincidence. I slowed down, trying to keep some distance. My phone was useless out here with no signal, and I had no idea what they wanted, but I sure as hell didn't want to find out. I flicked my headlights off for a second, hoping it might throw them off, make them think I'd turned back or pulled off somewhere. When I flicked the lights back on, the 3 figures had vanished. I scanned the road, looking for any sign of them, but it was as if they'd simply dissolved into the night. I exhaled shakily, feeling a twisted sense of relief, but it was short-lived. As I drove forward, I heard a thud. Something hit my car. It sounded like something heavy, something that dragged across the roof, scraping along the metal. My foot froze over the pedal, fear rooting me to the spot. I wanted to believe it was just a branch or some animal, but as the seconds dragged on, I knew better. A tap sounded on my window, soft but deliberate, like someone was knocking to be let in. I didn't dare look. Instead, I focused on the road, gripping the wheel as if it were my only lifeline. The knock came again, louder this time, then moved to the roof, a tap, tap, tap that traveled from the passenger side to directly above me. I took a deep breath, trying to think. My eyes darted to the gas gauge again, and I realized with growing dread that I was nearing empty. I couldn't afford to sit here. Whatever was out there, I couldn't wait around for it to make its next move. I took off, my tires screeching as I floored it. The knocking stopped, and for a brief, glorious second, I thought I might have outrun it, that I was finally free. But then I saw them. All 3 figures were standing in the road ahead, closer this time, their faces visible under the moonlight. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, their eyes wide and empty. Each of them wore a small, twisted smile, their mouths slightly open, showing rows of darkened, broken teeth. They were waiting for me. I slammed on the brakes, my car skidding to a halt mere feet from them. They didn't move, didn't flinch. They just stared, their heads cocked at odd angles, those blackened smiles growing wider. And then, slowly, the one in the center lifted his arm and pointed to the back seat of my car. I swallowed, my throat dry, feeling a sense of dread I'd never known possible. I didn't want to turn, didn't want to know what he was pointing at, but it was like some unseen force compelled me. My hands trembling, I glanced over my shoulder into the back seat. There, sitting directly behind me, was a fourth figure, his face mere inches from mine, his hollow eyes meeting mine in the mirror. His mouth stretched open in a wide, soundless scream as he lunged forward. I scrambled, fighting to get the door open, but his hands were on me before I could react, cold and unyielding, his face so close I could see every crack and flaw in his ghostly skin. His grip tightened, the pressure unbearable, and everything went dark as his hollow eyes bore into mine, dragging me into an endless, suffocating black. The last thing I heard was the sound of tapping, rhythmic. It was 2:47 a.m. when I first noticed the headlights behind me. Just a subtle glow in the rearview mirror, barely noticeable through the drowsy haze that had settled over me. I was halfway home on a desolate road winding through the countryside, far from any streetlights, houses, or gas stations. Just me, the road, and whatever was following me. I didn't think much of it at first. This wasn't a road you'd normally see another car on, but I figured maybe it was a trucker or some late-night driver who'd made a wrong turn. My car's clock ticked over to 2:48 and I yawned, rolling down the window a crack to let the crisp autumn air sharpen my senses. The lights behind me grew closer, a little too close for comfort, until they were so bright they cast my dashboard in a white, blinding glare. "Come on, man, back off," I muttered, squinting at the road ahead. But the car didn't back off. If anything, it inched closer. My fingers tightened around the steering wheel, my pulse picking up as I tapped the gas, putting a little distance between us. It didn't help. The car sped up too, staying in sync with my speed, a constant pressure bearing down on me. "All right, I get it," I whispered to myself, trying to keep calm. I switched lanes, moving to the right, expecting the other car to zoom past me. But it didn't. It followed my move, mimicking me exactly. Now I was beginning to get nervous. There was no logical reason for anyone to be playing this kind of game on a road like this, in the dead of night, and at speeds that only grew with every passing second. I pushed the pedal down a little harder, my car's engine whining as it hurtled down the road. The headlights behind me stayed close, so close that I could practically feel the heat off their beams against the back of my neck. My mind was racing now, trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't stop. The road was pitch dark, and there was no telling who was behind the wheel back there. I stole another glance in the rearview mirror, trying to make out any details of the car. All I could see was a hulking shape, headlights blazing, the silhouette of a massive black SUV. The windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see a thing inside, no shape of a driver or passengers. As I stared into the mirror, something strange happened. I could swear that for a brief second, the headlights behind me flickered. Just a quick strobe, like a glitch in a video. I blinked, trying to focus, but by then it was gone and the headlights were just as bright and steady as ever. I started to feel a chill in the pit of my stomach, a deep gut-level dread that had nothing to do with the cold night air seeping through the cracked window. I wanted to believe this was just some prank, maybe a reckless kid trying to mess with me. But this didn't feel like a prank, it felt wrong. Ahead, the road curved sharply, disappearing into a dense wall of trees. Without thinking, I cut the wheel, taking the curve fast. I heard my tires squeal as I rounded it, hoping that the other car would struggle to keep up, that maybe I could lose it in the bend. But when I glanced back, it was still there, effortlessly rounding the curve without even slowing down. That's when I noticed it. The road was a straight shot after the curve, and as my eyes flicked back to the rearview mirror, I realized that the car had changed. It was still the same SUV, still massive and menacing, but the headlights seemed dimmer, almost like they were flickering again. And then, as I watched, the SUV's headlights blinked off completely. The night went pitch black behind me. The silence that followed was suffocating, the kind that made my ears ring. For a second, I thought I'd finally lost it, that maybe the SUV had turned off onto a different road. I almost laughed, my grip on the wheel loosening as I exhaled in relief. But then, in the blink of an eye, the headlights reappeared. They were closer, much closer. My heart dropped as I realized what was happening. Every time I looked away, every time I took my eyes off the mirror, the SUV would vanish, only to reappear closer than before. I couldn't keep my eyes on the road and the mirror at the same time, but every time I looked back, it felt like the car was just seconds away from colliding with me. In a panic, I floored the gas pedal. The car shot forward, the engine roaring, my headlights slicing through the black. I wasn't even sure if I was still on the road. I was just trying to get away, desperate to escape this impossible, nightmarish chase. The SUV's lights blinked out again, and this time I kept my eyes fixed on the mirror, counting the seconds until it reappeared. I was gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white, my heartbeat hammering in my throat. 1 second, 2, 3. The headlights flicked back on just a few feet from my bumper, like it had somehow closed the distance in the blink of an eye. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me, an oppressive, suffocating force that filled the car, making it hard to breathe. I knew deep down that whatever was following me wasn't human, wasn't real in any normal sense of the word. But it was here, and it wanted me to know it was here. With a surge of adrenaline, I wrenched the wheel to the right, swerving onto a dirt road that cut off from the main road, kicking up a cloud of dust and gravel. The SUV didn't follow. It stopped abruptly at the edge of the dirt road, its headlights glaring at me one last time before they blinked out completely. I slammed on the brakes, the car lurching to a halt as I stared back at the empty road, waiting, half expecting it to appear again. But there was nothing. Only silence. The night as still as it had been hours ago, like nothing had happened at all. After a long moment, I let out a shaky breath, my hands trembling as I wiped sweat from my forehead. I sat there in the dark, the engine idling, my heart slowly settling back into a normal rhythm. Finally, I shifted into drive, ready to finish the journey home, trying to shake the nightmarish chase from my mind. But as I glanced back one last time, I saw it. In the reflection of my taillights, faint but unmistakable, the outline of the black SUV, waiting, its headlights dark, hidden just beyond the edge of the trees.